When you hear the word Mahabharata, what is the first thing that comes to mind? The Pandavas and Kauravas and the war they fought? Usually, when we talk about the Pandavas and Kauravas, we talk about stories where they're adults, warriors who ruled their kingdoms, who had children, and who fought big battles. But what were the Pandavas like as children? How were they born? What did they do as kids? Who were their teachers? Did they have tests at school? Were their teachers strict? In this Gurukul series, as part of the mini Mahabharata stories, this is how we will see the Pandavas. As little children first, and then as boys at school. In today's edition, which is the first part of the Gurukul series, we begin our journey with the birth of the heroes. Thousands of years ago, in Bharatavarsha, the powerful Chandravamshi kings ruled from Hastinapura. Chandravamshi meant that this line of kings began from the moon god or Chandra himself. In this line of powerful Chandravamshi kings came Pandu. Now, Pandu was a very good king who made Hastinapur much stronger and bigger. But he had to leave the kingdom for some reason. And he came to live in the forest with his two wives, Kunti and Madri. It was in the forest in the Shatashringa mountain ranges that the Pandavas were born. They were not ordinary children. They were born by the grace of gods. The older three were born to Kunti and the younger two to Madri. Yudhishthira was the oldest son and he was born by the grace of the god of justice, Dharma. The next oldest was Bhima, who was the son of Vayu, the wind god. As powerful as the wind and with a body as hard as diamonds, Bhima was very strong even as a newborn baby. One day, Kunti had tiny Bhima in her lap. Suddenly, she heard the roar of a tiger very close by. They were living in the forest, right? So there were many wild animals about. Now, Kunti was terrified. She quickly got up to her feet, forgetting completely that she had baby Bhima in her lap. She watched terrified as baby Bhima rolled down the edge of the cliff. Crying and screaming, she ran down, only to find that the baby was perfectly fine. There was not a scratch upon him. But the rock upon which baby Bhima had fallen was shattered into 100 pieces. Madri's sons were twins, Nakula and Sahadeva, and they were born with the grace of the heavenly healers who are called the Ashwini twins. But wait, aren't we missing someone? What about the third son of Pandu? This boy was even more special than his four brothers. He was not only born with half of the energy of the king of gods, Indra himself, he was also the ancient sage Nara, reborn on earth for a purpose. This child was named Arjuna, and he would go on to become the best friend of Krishna. Now, all the Pandavas began to grow up in the forest. They were all around a year apart in ages. So they never lacked playmates. When they became old enough, they began to learn all about weapons and battles from their father, Pandu, who was a great archer, meaning he was great with a bow and arrow. They also had another guru right in the forest, a sage named Shuka, who used to be a king before he decided to leave his kingdom behind and come to the forest. The boys learned the Vedas and other texts from the rishis in the forest too. So life was not all fun and games and no study. Even in the forest, the Pandavas were learning and training hard. But life was going to take a very sad turn for them. When Arjuna was 14, Pandu and Madri died. Yudhishthira, Bhima, and Arjuna lost their father and a loving stepmother. And the twins lost both parents. Now, Kunti was left with 5 young boys. How would she bring them up in the forest alone? After all, they were princes of Hastinapur's Kuru family or Kuru clan. Now she was the one who needed to make sure they learned what princes needed to learn. The wise rishis of the Shatashringa forests told her to take the boys back to their kingdom, back to Hastinapur. The Pandavas and Kunti came back to the kingdom that Pandu had once ruled and strengthened. But here, things were not exactly how they hoped them to be. When Pandu had gone away, the kingdom of Hastinapur was looked after by the grandsire Bhishma. Pandu's blind older brother Dhritarashtra was now acting king. Dhritarashtra had 100 sons and a daughter. Now the Pandavas had to learn to live in a strange place, in a palace, instead of the open wild, and also learn to live with 100 cousins they had never seen. It did not help that the cousins were not friendly. The eldest of Dhritarashtra's sons was Duryodhana, and his brothers followed whatever he said and did. With Bhima's great strength, many times as they played together, the Vayuputra ended up hurting his cousins. Duryodhana's dislike for Bhima and his brothers steadily grew into hatred until he began to try to kill Bhima. In one of these attempts, Duryodhana poisoned Bhima and then threw him into the river. As Bhima sank towards the bottom of the river, the snakes that lived there were frightened out of their wits. They bit Bhima over and over again. But the snake poison worked against the poison that Duryodhana had fed him. And Bhima came awake. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in the magical underwater world of the Nagas. The king of the Nagas realized who he was and welcomed him. Bhima was hungry now, and so the Nagas led him to their store of a special potion known as the ras. Now this ras was stored in many giant pots, filling up an entire room in Nagaloka. But the Nagas had no idea how hungry Bhima could get. He drank up 8 whole pots of the ras before his hunger was satisfied. The special Naga potion now made Bhima as strong as 10,000 elephants. Duryodhana's plan had failed miserably. Bhima came back stronger than ever before and furious with Duryodhana. But the Pandavas knew that it was best to just be on the watch and not tell people that the prince Duryodhana had tried to kill the Pandava. After all, Duryodhana was their own cousin. It would not do to have the people of Hastinapur thinking, what on earth is happening in the royal family? But Duryodhana would not stop with that. With help from others, he kept planning and plotting against the Pandavas, making many more attempts to get rid of them, to kill them. Duryodhana did not want anyone or anything coming in the way of his becoming the king of Hastinapura in the future. The constant clashes between the two sets of cousins made the elders of Hastinapura very worried. They thought that the boys needed to be busy doing something else. Anyway, they were all princes and they would have to get trained in the ways of the Kshatriya, the warrior, to protect the kingdom when they grew up. The Guru Kripacharya was asked to begin their training. At Gurukul too, Duryodhana's plots to hurt the Pandavas, especially Bhima, did not stop. But there was another change waiting to happen in the lives of the Pandavas, especially Arjuna, who would grow up to be the greatest warrior of his time in Bharatavarsha. One day, the boys were playing ball outside the palace of Hastinapura. As they threw the ball around, it flew and landed right inside a deep well. There was very little water right down at the bottom, and the ball floated there, but it was well out of reach. The boys tried many different ways to get the ball out. They tied long branches together and tried to reach the ball with it. They wondered if one of them could be lowered in and pulled out. But nothing seemed to work. Even as they began to bicker with each other about who was responsible for this mess, they heard someone laugh at them. The boys turned around to see who is this laughing at us. There they found a lean, white-haired, dark-skinned Brahmana standing casually leaning against a tree. He had sharp eyes and a gentle smile on his lips. Now, seeing them looking at him, the Brahmana spoke. So many Kshatriya princes, and not one of you can get a ball out of a well? Now, the boys were quite surprised to see that someone was speaking like this to them, the princess Hastinapur. They went up to the Brahmana. Yudhishthira asked him very humbly, very respectfully, "Can you help us get the ball out, sir?" The Brahmana laughed again and said, "Of course I can." He picked up the huge bow that was lying by his side, took his quiver full of arrows, and walked over to the well. But there, he did not use his bow or arrows. Instead, he picked up a few blades of grass from the ground. The boys wondered what he was planning to do with grass. They thought he would do something with the arrows, and here he was pulling up blades of grass. What was he planning to do? Get the ball out with grass. But that was exactly what the Brahmana did. He chanted a few mantras over the blades of grass in his hand. And then he leaned over into the well and shot the first blade of grass at the ball lying inside. And the grass blade went and stuck right into the ball as if it was a knife. The Brahmana threw the next blade and it went and stuck to the back of the first one. And he went on until he had a rope made of blades of grass leading right up to the ball. The Brahmana pulled at the last grass blade that he held in his hand, and up came the ball. The boys were simply too shocked to even react. This seemed like magic. They had never seen anything like this before. But wait, the Brahmana wasn't even done yet. He asked them, "Do you want to see me get my ring out too?" And before they could even answer him, he had pulled the golden ring he was wearing and thrown it inside the well too. The boy stared at him like he had gone mad. The ball was at least bigger, easier to see in the water. The ring was tiny. How on earth did he plan to get that out? Is this man slightly mad? The boys looked at each other questioningly now. This time, the Brahmana did use his bow. He shot an arrow right into the well in such a way that it went through the ring. And then it didn't stop there. It bounced right back to the Brahmana's hand, carrying the ring with it. The boys cheered aloud now, convinced that this was a magician standing before them. Yudhishthira now bowed low to him and thanked him. And then, curiously, he asked him, "Sir, we have never seen anything like this. May we know who you are?" The Brahmana smiled and said, "Go to your Pitamaha and tell him what happened here. He will tell you who I am." And with that, he walked away. Now, the boys were bursting with curiosity. They had to know who this was. After all, he had done something truly amazing, right? Who do you think it was? We'll find out in our next episode. Join me, Bharti, next week in episode 2 of our Gurukul series.